Hey, I'm Sean, this is High Valley Hobbies, and today we're going to be making this hermit's shack using nothing but things we found in our recycling bin and a quick trip to the dollar store. Let's get into it. Alright, so just to clarify, you might not be able to find everything I'm using in this video at the dollar store. Ugh. Is that the taste of clickbait? Ugh, gross. I think if you look hard enough, you can certainly find almost all of it at the dollar store, but I've done my best to use materials that all cost around the dollar mark to keep to the spirit of the video. This shack we're going to be making is actually inspired by an old abandoned one-room log cabin about an hour from my house. I've always wondered who built it and what it was used for. For the bulk of the structure, we're going to be using dollar store foam core. I love this stuff. It's super easy to work with and super affordable. Just be sure to peel back the paper covering before you start cutting and gluing it together. I'm marking out rough dimensions for the walls. No need to be exact here, but I usually like to have my buildings in a scale that's roughly 2¼ to 2½ inches per floor. The walls will form roughly a 4" by 4" box. Since we're going to have an angled roof, make sure you add that feature to 2 of those walls. You'll notice that my roof is not quite centered, and that's on purpose. You'll see why in a minute. Use a nice sharp hobby knife or box cutter to cut the foam and get nice clean lines. I'm going to be marking out any doors and windows using a quick template I made for a previous project. It marks out a roughly 3/4 by 1¼ inch window. I'm adding 3 of these, 1 on each side and 1 in the front. The front door is about 1¼ inch wide and 1½ inches tall. Use that same sharp knife to cut out those openings. And keep those window and door cutouts. We'll be using them to build up our chimney and front door a little later. To stick our walls together, I'm going to be using hot glue. Hot glue provides a quick, strong bond, but does cool pretty fast compared to other glues and can be a little messy to work with. Just keep that in mind. Run a bead along the inside of each corner section and press the 2 pieces together for a few seconds to get a good bond. Just like that, the basic structure of our shack is done. It was here I made my first mistake. I'm planning on adding a small porch onto the front and accidentally cut down all the way to the bottom. It's an easy fix, just measure out the required thickness on the bottom and make the required cuts and re-glue any foam that was taken off by mistake. This will all be covered up in the final product, so you won't even notice. With that, we're onto the roof. I'm using some medium weight chipboard here and cutting out the rough dimensions of each side of the roof with a pair of scissors. To attach the 2 pieces, I'm using a strip of masking tape. Stick the 2 sides to the tape and flip it over. You'll now be able to use a little hot glue on the edges of the walls and slide the roof right on. Remember how I cut the roof a little bit off center? That's because we're adding a porch to the front and I want the roof to slope down and seamlessly cover that too. I'm using a cheap 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch piece of balsa wood to make the porch. Balsa is a great soft wood that cuts easily with a hobby knife and takes texture really well. I'm measuring out the various frame pieces and making the required cuts. I want it to come out 1 inch from the front door, so I'm cutting 3/4 inch pieces to leave room for the 1/4 inch thickness of the end piece. To add a little more wood grain texture, I'm using the dull side of an old hobby knife and scraping it on the wood with the grain. This might seem unnecessary to add fake wood grain to wood, but it really makes the texture pop on the tabletop once we get to our painting step. See? Check that out. I'm adding those pieces with a dab of hot glue before measuring, cutting, texturing, and attaching the end piece. I'm using those pieces as a guide for the roof of the porch too. A little bit more hot glue and we'll have something that looks a little bit like this. I'm just cleaning up the biggest globs of hot glue with my fingers to make things look a little cleaner. After that, cut out a piece of chipboard for the roof, and that's it. For the chimney, I'm going to use a couple of those window cutouts I told you to hang on to give the chimney its rough shape and give it a little bit of bulk. To make the brick for the chimney, we're going to turn to any scrap foam core that's lying around. I don't take exact measurements here, but I try and cut roughly 1/4 to 1/3 inch strips out of the foam and slice those strips into various size bricks. Having uneven sizes will give the chimney a little more of a handmade feel than perfect 1/2 inch by 1/4 inch bricks would. Repeat that process until you've got a nice big pile of bricks. If you like making terrain, these will come in handy for other projects later. To attach the bricks, I like putting away the hot glue gun and reaching for Aleene's tacky glue. It's very sticky and dries faster than regular PVA glue, but not as fast as hot glue does. I like tacky glue because it gives me a little bit of wiggle room to make small adjustments as I start laying the bricks. Take your bricks and start laying down a basic pattern. Don't worry if they hang over the edge, we'll be trimming off the excess once the glue dries. After an hour or so, the glue should be strong enough to slice off those excess bits of foam with a sharp knife. Use those cutoffs to fill the remaining holes in the bottom of the chimney. To build the roof section of the chimney, use the tacky glue as the mortar for your foam bricks. Lay down a layer of glue and then continue your pattern up as high as you want your chimney to go. Be sure to remember to make the necessary angled cuts to see that your chimney fits snug against the roof line. Once you reach the top of your chimney, I like to flip a few of those bricks on their side and attach them to the top for a little bit of a flared out look. To add texture to our foam bricks, we're using the tried and true aluminum foil ball trick. I take a sheet of foil and crumple it up into a ball. I actually like making a bit of a cylinder with it so I have more angles to work with and to fit in all those nooks and crannies. Mash the foil into the foam bricks to give it texture. Dollar store foam takes texture really well, and you can go as crazy as you want with this step. When you're done, you should have a chimney that looks like it could be made out of stone. On to the windows. This is definitely the most finicky part of the whole project, but it's not too bad as long as you're patient. I'm using matchsticks to make the window frames. Take a matchstick and hold it up to the window to get a measurement for the first piece of frame. Use a pair of clippers to make the necessary cut, and slide the cut piece into the opening with a couple of dabs of tacky glue. Repeat the steps for the second part of the frame and for each of the 3 windows. Remember, I said this can be frustrating, especially if your cuts are a little bit off. Just be patient, recut if you need to, and you'll be fine. To make the door, take the cutout you saved. You did save that cutout, right? Take that cutout and a handful of wooden coffee stir sticks. Snip the round ends off the sticks and use the same texture method from the porch to add in a little more wood grain than what's there naturally. Then make the appropriate length cuts for the size of the door and glue them in place. For a little extra detail, I'm cutting a couple of thin strips of chipboard to represent some metal banding on the door. Make one end pointy, and use a hole puncher to add a little detail that can read as rivets once it's painted. Then glue them on. For a door handle, take a small square of chipboard and glue it to the right side of the door. At this scale, that can be enough, but I like to add a little extra. I'm going to use a little bit of this small polystyrene tube and a jewelry jump ring to make a handle. I cut the tube in half lengthwise and fit it over the jump ring before gluing them both to the door. To attach the door to the structure, add a bead of glue around the frame and just pop it in. If you used the cutout and measured correctly, it should slide in pretty easily. For the wood siding, we're going to be using more coffee stir sticks. Cut the rounded ends off and add texture just like before. There's no fast way to do this, and you'll need a lot of these to cover the whole cabin. Just put on your favorite podcast and power through it till you have a nice big stack of textured wood sticks. To add the siding, just hold each piece up to the section you want to cover, make the appropriate length cuts with your clippers, and glue them in place with tacky glue. Repeat this all around the building until all sides and the porch are covered. I added the siding on the A-frame to run vertically to break up the shapes a little bit and add a little more visual interest, but that's totally optional. With the siding on, we're now onto our shingles. This is a pretty easy step. While you can cut out individual shingles and glue them on one by one, I found this method to be much faster, and in my opinion, it looks a whole lot better too. I'm taking an old frozen pizza box and cutting strips that are about 3/8 of an inch thick. Just like the siding, you'll need a lot of these strips. After you've got your strips, take a pair of scissors and make a series of cuts along the length of the strip. Don't cut all the way here. What we're doing is making a strip of shingles that can be glued on all at once instead of individually. Then bend every other shingle back and cut off just a little of each of those. You'll see this add a little variation to each shingle, giving it a nice handmade look. After that, it's as simple as measuring, cutting, and gluing each strip on until you've got a full roof. Once you reach the top, here is where you'll have to make individual shingles. But don't worry, it's actually not too many. Make a stack of small shingles and bend each of them in your fingers. Glue them on one by one in an overlapping style to make a nice top to your roof. With that, we are done with the building part of the project. Before we put any paint down, we'll want to take one extra step to protect our work and prime the piece at the same time. I like the classic Mod Podge and black paint method made popular by Jeremy over at Blackmagic Craft. Once it's dry, the Mod Podge will add a protective layer to the structure, and the black paint acts as a primer coat for our paint. Slather it on all over, but don't leave any big globs to dry that would clog any details. It will be pretty sticky when you're done. I left mine overnight to dry. The next day, the Mod Podge is dry and nice and hard, and we're ready for some paint. I'm starting on the chimney with some dark gray craft paint. While it's still wet, I like to add a little variation with red, green, and light brown paint. Rocks are rarely gray in nature, and this step will add a little more variation and blend in nicely once we add our dry brushing and wash a little later. For the slate roof, I'm using black with just a touch of white to make a very dark gray, and a nice brown for the wood. This color dried super streaky after one coat, but that's okay. It will actually add to the weathered wood effect we're going for later. For the door, I'm using a desaturated green to make it a little bit more interesting. To bring out all the textures, let's move on to dry brushing. I'm using a lighter brown to bring out the texture in all that wood. The drier the brush, the better here. You'll only want the faintest amount of paint to come off your brush in this step. Next, I'm using a lighter gray for the slate roof and a heavy dry brush on the chimney to blend those color variations I added in earlier. After dry brushing, I painted the metal parts of the door with a dark silver. For the door handle, I added a little copper, but this was barely noticeable in the finished product, so I'm not sure it's necessary. To bring out those textures even more and pull back some of that dry brushing, I'm adding an all-over dark wash. This one I made myself with some water, black and brown acrylic ink, and a little dish soap to break the surface tension and help it flow into the cracks, but you can use whatever you have on hand. Get it all over everywhere. Don't be shy. After that, leave it to dry for at least an hour or two. After the wash dried, I felt it dulled down the highlights a little bit too much, so I went back with some light dry brushing on the slate roof and wood siding. Once I was happy with the highlights, this puppy's ready for the tabletop. That does it for this one. I really like breaking up my painting projects with a good terrain piece every once in a while. You don't have to be super precise, you can be a little bit messy, and at the end, you're left with something pretty cool for your tabletop. This cabin would fit in perfect for pretty much any D&D encounter or tabletop wargaming experience I can think of. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe down below. It really helps my videos reach more of you so we can all grow in this hobby together. Did you like the terrain crafting videos, or should I just stick to mini painting? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey, I'm Sean, this is High Valley Hobbies, and today we're going to be making this hermit shack using nothing... Penny. I need you to lay down, my girl.